The Kremlin?
The Kremlin.
In the Kremlin?
It'll be like Christmas in the Kremlin.
The Kremlin says, the Kremlin does. Everybody talks about it, but what exactly is the Kremlin? Kremlin in Russia means fortress. Lots of Russian towns and cities have them, but the most famous is Moscow's Kremlin. A 28-hectare fortified complex dominating the heart of Moscow since around the 13th century. Outside, red brick walls and 20 towers of various heights and shapes mark its perimeter. Inside, palaces, cathedrals and churches where Russia's earliest tsars, including Ivan the Terrible, are buried. It's also right beside Red Square, the site of massive military parades overseen by Russian and Soviet leaders, many of whom are entombed in the Kremlin's walls. So why do people often refer to the Kremlin and Putin in the same sentence? Since the revolution in 1917, the Kremlin has been the seat of power in Russia and the Soviet Union. That explains why the word Kremlin is now used internationally to refer to the Russian presidency. It's a World Heritage Site, and it's Vladimir Putin's official place of work, though he doesn't live there. He's already spent around 13 years as president. If he's re-elected next year, he could stay in power until 2024. That would make it a total of 20 years in the Kremlin.
A look inside Russia's Kremlin. Throughout history, the Kremlin has remained a symbol for both Russian and Soviet power and authority. The Kremlin contains a huge fortune enough to give the royals an easygoing and luxurious life. Sitting at the heart of Russia's capital in Moscow, the Kremlin's buildings contain massive treasures worth billions of dollars that you can only dream about. The Kremlin, which serves as the official residence of the Russian president since 1991, is surrounded by a strong perimeter wall. But even though the Kremlin is open to the public, there are several secret royal spaces inside which are heavily guarded, like the Grand Kremlin Palace. Interested to know details of this iconic tourist attraction in Moscow? Well, be sure to stick around till the end to find out. Considering that the Kremlin is the home of the Russian president, there can be no doubt that the walls of the Kremlin must have been built with much precision to offer enough protection. You'll be surprised that the walls of the Kremlin are protected by 20 defensive towers. However, tourists are only allowed to enter the Kremlin through the Trinity Tower. Interestingly, the towers contain secret tunnels underneath that were used as dungeons. When you enter the Kremlin, the first thing you will notice on your left is the arsenal. As the name goes, this is the section that houses luxurious military trophies and weapons of the 18th century. Today, you'll find here the caserne of the presidential regiment and administrative offices. The arsenal has undergone several renovations to bring it to its current state. However, the last time it was rebuilt was in 1828. But you'll also notice the State Kremlin Palace sitting just across the way. Built in 1961 for the Congresses of the Communist Party, the State Kremlin Palace is an event theater with over 800 rooms. It is surprisingly the newest building of the Kremlin and has become the most popular concert hall in Moscow. By a mere look from the outside, you may want to think that the State Kremlin Palace is too short. But you'll be amazed to realize that about 16 meters of the building structure is hidden underground. Moving on, and we have Cathedral Square, which is the heart of the Kremlin complex. It is at the Cathedral Square where you'll find several ancient Orthodox churches of different eras, which include the 15th century Dormition, majestic Cathedral of the Archangel, Cathedral of the Annunciation, Patriarchal Chambers, and the Church of the 12 Apostles. All these temples are museums and are open to the public to see ancient Orthodox icons, pre-revolution photos, and maps of the Kremlin, among others. Well, if you think you've explored the entire Kremlin, then wait until you enter the Grand Kremlin Palace. This architectural complex inside the Kremlin walls is the main attraction of the Kremlin. Measuring 124 meters long by 47 meters high, the Grand Kremlin Palace covers a total of 25,000 square meters, forming a rectangle with an inner courtyard. It was commissioned by Nicholas I in 1838 and prides itself as the largest structure in the Kremlin. It is estimated that the Grand Kremlin Palace cost a whopping 11 million rubles to put up, which was about $150,000 then. In a surprising move, the Grand Palace was renovated at a cost of over $1 billion in the 1990s. This attraction contains secret rooms of the Tsars of the past. It includes the Armory, the Terem Palace, the Faceted Palace, and the reception halls. The Grand Kremlin Palace is a two-storied building that is designed to appear as three-storied and contains several collections of treasures. Even though the Grand Kremlin Palace was used to host the coronations of Russian emperors, today the palace serves as the ceremonial residence of the President of Russia in the building called the Senate. In the Armory, you'll find treasures worth over $1 billion, including ancient weapons, armor, as well as royal ceremonial clothing. For instance, this icon crown named the Great Imperial Crown was estimated to be worth $52 million in 1920. Now, that is great and tells you just how the Armory is full of luxurious items. But that is not all. The Armory is also decorated with over 5,000 gems, adding up to 2,858 carats. When you tour the Armory, you'll also get to see the famous double throne, which belonged to Tsars Ivan and Peter. This throne is made up of a secret compartment in the back where the Tsar's mentor used to hide to give young rulers advice and is considered priceless. At the back of this hall of treasures is a long passageway leading to the first residence of the Russian Tsars, called the Terem Palace. Here we get to notice that the palace contains an antechamber, a place where people would wait for their meeting with the royal family just before they could enter the assembly hall. Next to the antechamber is the throne room, which has the Tsar's red armchair firmly positioned in the corner of the room. The entire palace's inner walls are beautifully tiled and coated with gold and rich royal colors to give a luxurious feel. Amazingly, the Romanov family who once lived here had some huge wealth with a net worth of nearly $300 billion. Needless to say, the palace has a secret underground library carved in the passageways that was owned by Ivan the Terrible, a former Grand Prince of Moscow. The Terem Palace is a 5-story building with cells and storm rooms located in the basement. The first floor is specifically secluded for workshops and garment creation. However, the royal family resides on the second and third floors, where you'll find their personal rooms. For instance, Tsarina, along with her children, had their bedrooms located on the 3rd story. The Tsars, on the other hand, had their personal apartments, which included 5 adjoining rooms located on the 4th floor. On the 5th floor, you'll find a tent-like roof and upper stone courtyard, which gives an amazing panoramic view of the Kremlin. Moving on to another part of the Grand Kremlin Palace, and we have the Faceted Chamber. This is where the imperial throne is stored. This chamber is guarded by a gold lion statue located towards the far end of the staircases. The lion statue is believed to have special powers which protected the Tsar's family. There is also a secret passage that was discovered in the Faceted Chamber connecting it to the Annunciation Cathedral, which was used to store treasure. You'll also be surprised to realize that this golden reception room was built by Ivan III in 1490. And as you can see, this reception is built with a discreet window looking down into the chamber. Ideally, this is where the Tsar's wife would follow all the events in the chamber. Moving on towards the end of the corridor, you get to see the private rooms of President Vladimir Putin, a man who has accumulated a huge amount of wealth. And finally, the Grand Kremlin Palace consists of 5 round reception halls dedicated to a different order of the Russian Empire, featuring the grandest gold architecture beyond imagination. The halls were used for meetings and conferences of the Supreme Soviet of the USSR. Sitting at the center of the palace is a round hall dedicated to the Order of Vladimir. This reception, which has huge windows to offer enough natural light inside, is also lit by a hanging bronze chandelier in the evening. Moving on, and we have these gold-plated doors leading us to the St. Andrew's Hall. The St. Andrew's Hall consists of 3 golden thrones. There's also the St. George Hall, which prides itself as the largest of all the ceremonial halls. As you can see, this hall has 6 huge bronze chandeliers and a floor made of 20 different types of wood. Now, these gilded gold-plated doors lead us to the Alexander Hall, which is glistening bright with gold and dazzling chandeliers. You're welcomed with an opulently decorated ceiling and a floor that is well furnished to take after a woven mat. And lastly, there is the Catherine Hall, which was named after the only female Russian order. Before, it was the throne room of the Russian Empress, featuring enough well-positioned chandeliers to light the hall, ornaments, and crystal candelabras. So, there you are, guys, a look inside Russia's Kremlin. And as we've seen, the Kremlin is the oldest, yet the most expensive and iconic attraction in the Russian capital of Moscow. It houses expensive Russian treasure that attracts massive amounts of tourists. But at the same time, it has secret rooms which are heavily guarded. Which part of the Kremlin attraction interests you most? Let us know in the comments below.